We keep it unemotional in today's podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Rentvesting Podcast, the ultimate property podcast that unpacks the facts and explains what's really going on in property. Learn how to live where you want, but invest where you can afford with your hosts, Louis Strange and Jayden Vecchio.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Rentvesting Podcast. I'm Jayden.
I'm Louis.
This week we've got a huge episode. We're going to be talking about the 4 steps to buying property undervalued, because I feel Sydney property market's going crazy, Melbourne's crazy. There's value, there's ways that you can get a better deal, hopefully.
Yeah, so today we'll be breaking down 4 practical steps of what you need to know to pick up a bargain in the property market.
Or at least try it. So we're going to look at knowing and understanding what the local market value is, and probably continuing on from some of those themes for the last few podcasts.
Yeah, being deal ready. So sorting out your financing, having a bit of a plan on how much you can afford.
And jumping on opportunities, which is obviously always really important. The next point is, working connections and using agents and other people in the local area to help get you the best deal.
Yeah, and last point is negotiating. So offering lower than what they're expecting and sort of working backwards from there.
And then we've got my secret special 4Ds to the things that you need to know to actually get the absolute best property deal in the market. Ready to go?
Let's do it.
Sweet. All right, man, Louis, let's kick it off.
So know what market value is the first practical step. So Jen, do you want to run through what a valuation of property is?
Love to. So this is something that people either hate or really don't like as part of the whole mortgage process.
Or don't even know.
Getting a valuation. So basically what the banks do as a part of getting a loan is send out an independent valuer who basically looks at the property, the price you've paid on the contract, and assesses, is that within the local market or is it outside? And generally, in property, the value of a property is based on local sales. So your sale is considered comparable, and that's what the banks look at. But other things that they use to compare your property to and actually determine the value of your property, there's a couple of things. So they look at similar properties. So if you're buying a house, they compare it against houses. If you're buying a unit, they compare it against units. They compare the amount of bedrooms, the type of construction, if it's made of timber, if it's made of brick, if it's low set or high set in the case of a house. And they look at properties that are within a kilometre of your property, subject property, and sales that have occurred within the last 3 months. So even for you doing your own research, if you found a particular property or a unit you were looking at buying, it's as simple as going on realestate.com.au, looking at some recent sales and seeing what another 2-bedroom unit sold for in that complex, and really sort of front running and getting a better understanding on the local market value.
And that's sort of where on the house and the sort of online websites,
RP data.
Yeah, that's how they operate to get a reasonably accurate estimation of how much the property is actually worth. So they obviously give a pretty big range and they tell you how certain they are, and it's all around what's sold in the local area.
Even looking at realestate.com.au earlier this morning at a couple of listings, and it actually shows down the bottom of the website now sales that have happened in the last couple of months. So it actually, you're not going in there blind when you go and inspect properties and saying, asking the agent what it's worth, because those guys aren't always trustworthy.
So the price compared to the valuation then, we've previously talked about supply and demand. So that's basically what makes up the price. But property is in a weird little environment where the actual underlying value of the property is pretty much reliant on that supply and demand situation. So any other asset class, you take shares or bonds, you just plug numbers into a calculation, and that gives you, based around some estimates and assumptions, what the underlying value is. But property is a little different. It works off more so what's happening in the market.
Yeah, the recent sales, like I mentioned. So that's where you've got to understand what sold recently, not what sold 2 years ago. And just because, often I'll catch up with someone and say, what's your house worth, Louis? Oh, well, something sold here 5 years ago for $30 million, so my house is worth it $30 million. It isn't.
No.
And that's emotions, and that's something we'll come back to on point 4. But mate, the next point.
So be deal ready. That involves having a plan. So knowing what you can afford. So doing up a bit of a budget, getting your finances in place. Also, a lot of people don't know, as soon as you sign that contract, you need to have your insurances in place first.
In Queensland.
In Queensland.
Yeah. So from basically 5 p.m, you're liable for that property. And there were cases in the floods here a couple of years ago where people had signed contracts and hadn't settled on it, but didn't realise that they actually should have had insurance and all sorts of issues. But even back to Louis' other point, I get phone calls from people all the time that are going to auction the next day and saying, "Oh, can you get me a pre-approval?" And it, unfortunately, in finance, like mate, it just nothing moves quickly.
Yeah.
So you need to be ahead, know what your repayment's going to be, know if you can afford it, and know if you've got enough deposit.
Yeah. And simple way to do that is just contact a broker to ask them.
Yeah, shout out.
Just ask them to work out what your servicing would be like, so they can put in your exact current situation in any template and tell you how much you can actually afford and how much the bank will actually lend you. So that's the biggest note just there, especially if you're going to auction, just knowing that you've got financing in place or you'll be able to afford the loan that you're actually getting.
And I think even more for finance nerds like Louis is knowing the structures you're going to have. So if you're buying an investment property, should you put in a trust?
Yeah.
Should you put in your partner's name? What percentage split should it be? Should it be 99, 1% split? You need to know that up front before you sign a contract.
If you muck that up, it's very expensive to change. So a few examples on that. If you've got a husband and wife buying an investment property, 50-50 split between them, the wife's on maternity leave, not actually earning an income, then good luck trying to claim a deduction on the deductible interest. So half of the deductible interest of the property would therefore be forfeit while on maternity leave. And also in structures, if you put a property inside a trust, and there's nothing offsetting the income that it's earning, basically you've lost deductibility again. And trying to get that out of there, you've then got to do transfer fees, stamp duty, pay any capital gains tax on the property. So all of these things can cost thousands of dollars if you just make a mistake from the initial purchase.
And having that planning, because things like land tax and owning other properties in different structures, you pay it instantly, whereas in your personal land there's certain thresholds. So moreover, second point, be deal ready.
Yeah. And also focus just basically on knowing the area a little bit. So do your research for the deal. So back to that point in the floods, sometimes the agents don't really want to tell you if it flooded, and especially if...
And apparently they're only under obligation. We were talking to an agent the other day.
Yeah.
If you ask them. So if I said, "Excuse me, Louis, agent, was this property flooded 3 years ago?" And then they're like, "Oh yeah, whoops. I have to tell you." But they're under no obligation to tell you unless you ask them, which is crazy.
And the same with big infrastructure projects. So say, for instance, it looks like a very tranquil backyard. You've got plenty of land behind you. But
the serenity.
The serenity. It turns out there's going to be a giant four-lane highway put in just behind you. Just know what's in plans prior to entering into that. Otherwise, 2 years down the track, you'll have a lot of construction work going on and it won't be as tranquil.
Be terrible. So the next point is connections. And in real estate, there's nothing more important than having people in the know and the connections. Like Louis said, knowing the local town planning, but not just that. Although the agents, you don't always like them. And until Purple Bricks and a few of those other companies start getting more and more out there, you need to work those connections. So to be able to buy undervalued properties, you've got to know before it hits the market, or you've got to know opportunities where maybe there's vendors that are desperate to sell for reasons that we're going to cover in the 4 Ds later on in the episode. But, knowing the real estate agents and be able to work them gives you access to that.
And it's all around everything in life is more who you know, not what you know. So you can know everything about the property, but if you don't get along with the agent and they're basically representing who's selling the property, they're not going to look after you in any regard. So they're going to try and squeeze you potentially for every little dollar you're worth.
Which gets us to our next point is making low offers. So obviously, you're going, "Jayden and Louis, you guys are idiots." Clearly, to get a better deal, you pay less. But the reality, and Louis, correct me if I'm wrong, but for all investments, you make your money on the buy.
Yeah.
So if you overpay at the front, you're going to have to make a lot more money or hold it for a lot longer to make any money at the back end.
Exactly. And the biggest thing with that, making your money on the buy, is if you overpay from the get-go and the property declines in value. Whenever something declines in value, you've got to make more on the upside to get back to your original amount. So a quick example, say a property's worth $100. You buy for $100. All of a sudden, GFC happens and it was on the Gold Coast, goes down to $50. You've now got to make 100% gain to get back to your original value. So your $100 turns to $50, which is a 50% decline. But to get back, it's 100% climb back up that hill. So buying lower just means you've got more upside rather than downside potential.
Which is always hard because, people of our age don't have patience.
And sometimes emotions may not be in control. So they're the two biggest things when it comes to low offers. Having your emotions in check, knowing exactly what you want to pay for a property, and being patient around that. So,
I know one of my clients who owns a stack of property always says, there's always going to be another deal.
Yeah.
So some people will come in to me the day before going to auction, desperate to buy a property. It's the best house they've ever seen. They've never seen anything better. But the reality is you've got to take a step back and there's going to be another deal. That's not going to be the best one necessarily.
Exactly.
It can be a good deal, but there's always something else. So, there's no harm in being a bit patient and taking time to take a breather and go back to those other points, knowing what the market value is and being prepared to make a good offer.
Especially if it's for an investment. If it's for an investment, you should not be emotional about it. You shouldn't think, it's a lovely bedroom. I could see myself living there one day. It should be just from a practical point. What's the yield going to be on this property? What's the upside potential? And not get caught up in just that emotional game. And basically...
It's like you don't invest in Coca-Cola because you like the taste.
Yeah.
It's a good asset. It's a good
unless
business.
you drink a lot of Coke.
Yeah, then you might.
So especially with auctions around that, people overbidding or even outbidding themselves. So I know I've been
tell the story.
Yeah, I've been to a few auctions where it hasn't hit the reserve yet. So technically the property's not on the market, but no one else is bidding. So say the sellers want $700,000 for the property, but the highest bid got to $640,000. What the auctioneer often does, which is normally a little sneaky, goes away.
And they're always in the buyer's ear, like,
yeah,
you look great in this property, your family will love it, blah, blah,
and
blah.
they're pretty good at reading the saps out there. So for a few poor individuals who had the winning bid, but it hadn't hit that magical reserve number, the auctioneer actually made them bid against themselves. So he said, okay, 60K short of where you need to be. Just bid another 60K, we'll get there. So if you're in the know, you don't have to do that. It just doesn't go on market, but then you're entered into private negotiations and deals with the seller. So just don't outbid yourself.
And it's easy, I know when I bought my first property, you just get deal fatigue and you look at 10 properties over the stretch of, a weekend, over the stretch of 6 months, and then you just feel like, I just want to buy that. But I think take a step back, plan for it, and make sure you don't make a mistake, which takes us to our last point actually in this fit is negotiating. So you had an example when you bought your property, but if they're looking for 500,000 and you offer 400,000, if they come back and count it for 450, I get my numbers confused. That's probably a good sign that the vendor's up for a bit of negotiation. They've come down 50, but if they come back in at 495, there's probably not a lot of movement there, and that's you're not going to get very far negotiating with them.
Exactly. And the agent will always say, no, this is the minimum that they want. So the last property I was in was a minimum of 600,000. That's the very lowest that they're offer. So I said, that's great. Here's an offer of 510. So just waited to hear back. They said, no, it's far too low. Can you go a little higher? And I said, well, fine. There's an additional $1,000. So often the agents won't come back to you with another offer. They'll just say, can you go higher? So just don't come to the party. Just offer them a small amount more, and then they'll eventually go and talk to the buyer or the seller, and the seller will actually say, okay, well, we'll actually accept less.
Well, and really, agents are in the game to sell property, not to just leave it on the market. So I think if you're prepared, if you go in there professional, if you've already spoken to the agent, you've got the connection, a bit of a relationship there, and the situation, the background to the vendor selling, you're always going to buy under market value and get a better deal than the person that just walks in there with a blank check and offers what it's listed for.
Yeah, exactly.
So really, in closing, the 4Ds.
4Ds.
Drum roll. If we had a drum roll, all the sound effects, we would do that. So really, like we said, knowing the agent, the connections, the things, the tells that you'll find if for getting the best deal are, number one, if people are desperate to sell. So sometimes people might have already purchased another house, need to sell this to move on, and they'll have more urgency to sell it rather than someone that could be,
One of the best ones I've seen are bank foreclosures. So if they've bought a home...
Wait, that's not a D? That wasn't one.
It's desperation.
Mortgagee in possession.
Yeah, so in desperation, I've seen some places go far below what they've paid for a year prior because they're desperate to sell it because the bank is basically foreclosing on the house.
Which you'll see online, they'll mark it as MIP or mortgage in possession is usually what they have it as. The next point is deceased estate. So you'll see them sometimes, and they'll be the houses with those ugly curtains and brown carpet that hasn't been changed. But, typically...
The old cigarette smoke.
Gross. But usually, the kids or the estate just want a quick sale, and they'll put on the market for 30 days and bullet it for the first offer. They're not there for an extra $5,000 or $10,000. So that's a great opportunity to buy something undervalued.
And then divorce.
Oof. Heartbreak City.
Heartbreak.
The name of a horse. Oh, it didn't win, actually. But anyway, if again, divorce, similar to ceased estate, usually they're bound to make a sale within a certain period as a part of their divorce arrangement agreement, and they're not going to quibble over $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 sometimes. So you can buy something quite undervalued for a good deal.
Because in a way, the longer they delay, the more lawyer fees they have to pay. So that additional $5,000 will be eaten up very quickly in a month.
Ouch. And the last of the 4 Ds?
It's distance.
Yes. So it's your typical interstate investor, doesn't care. It's a pure financial transaction. They might have bought the property 10 years ago. Like I have a friend on the Gold Coast that owned a property there, bought it in 98 for $200,000. Ended up in the peak, it hit sort of 400. He ended up selling it for 300 a couple of years ago. And for him, 10, 20, 30 grand actually didn't really make a difference. He'd made his money. It'd been rented out. He just wanted to offload it to pay off some debt down south. So just recognizing those signs, understanding, really probably asking more questions is really the key to all of this. And
that's where the whole connections part comes in. If you can have an open dialogue with the agent, get to know the situation.
Grit your teeth and just smile.
Just pretend you enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, to recap the 4 steps.
Number 1, know and intimately understand the market value.
Yep.
Do your own valuation exercises and be a champion.
Exactly. Be deal ready. Get a bit of a plan in place. Know what you can afford, the structure, the process, and what's going on in the area.
Number 3, be a mover and shaker. Have the connections, know the agents, and really ask those critical questions. Why are they selling? Really delve into that, and maybe even find some off-market transactions that the public wouldn't get access to.
Yeah. And last point, be a low ball baller.
Mm-hmm. So low offers, sort of taking the emotion out of anything you do with property, because at the end of the day, it's an investment.
Yeah.
That's somewhere to live. But if you're investing, you've got to take that away and look at the numbers subjectively and make better decisions.
Exactly.
Solid. Thanks, guys. Make sure you check us out on the website and on Facebook, rentvestingpodcast.com.au, or our Facebook, The Rentvesting Podcast. And until next week, peace.
See you guys.